Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 20th of August 2012, the podcast that refuses to release its birth certificate or its tax returns. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's release to the public domain the news of the bogus. How many videos have to be blocked due to bogus DMCA takedowns before our politicians start rethinking our insane copyright laws? Probably never, since big media has better lobbyists. But you'd think that something that belongs to all of us, that we paid for, that is absolutely 100% indisputably in the public domain, something like that being taken down for copyright infringement would at least warrant cocked eyebrows from politicians. Of course, we were all excited to watch the landing of the new Mars rover Opportunity. You know, if that's the only thing outside the Constitution the government was doing, I wouldn't really mind so much. Anyway, many of us watched and rewatched NASA's YouTube video of the landing. Well, those of us who got in early anyway. After that, despite the fact that NASA videos, like all material produced by the federal government, is public domain, despite the fact that NASA themselves uploaded it to NASA's official channel, the video was taken down by a false DMCA claim. Users who tried to watch the video instead got a notice saying, quote, "This video contains content from Scripps Local News, who has blocked it on copyright grounds." And according to the DMCA, YouTube is not allowed to put the video back for another 10 business days. Unbelievable. If YouTube doesn't comply with the DMCA, they could lose their so-called safe harbor status. In other words, they could be sued for copyright infringement along with the alleged violator. Of course, in any sensible system of justice, they wouldn't be able to be sued at all. So this is really the DMCA just making them jump through hoops to get immunity they should already have. Not only that, but those who make false DMCA claims supposedly do so under penalty of perjury. But it's hard to find any cases of this actually being prosecuted. And even if it is outright perjury, the video still has to stay down for the mandatory 10 business days. The problem may be related to YouTube's Content ID system. In cooperation with several content providers, this system scans YouTube looking for the digital fingerprint of copyrighted media. For providers where YouTube has a partnership, this means that ads can be placed next to the infringing content, allowing it to stay while generating some money for the copyright holder. It doesn't sound like a bad system, but if they're not a partner, the digital fingerprint suffices as a DMCA notice and YouTube takes the video down. Apparently that's what happened here. Somehow YouTube's system fingered the NASA video as having a fingerprint of content owned by Scripps. You can see how this sort of thing might happen. Scripps makes a news broadcast featuring some of the footage, which they upload to YouTube and copyright. The system makes a fingerprint, and since the NASA footage is similar, concludes it's infringing content and takes it down. Scripps issued an apology, quote, "We apologize for the temporary inconvenience experienced when trying to upload and view a NASA clip early Monday morning. We made a mistake. We reacted as quickly as possible to make the video viewable again, and we've adjusted our workflow process to remedy the situation in the future." But it's hard to imagine swift action like this being taken for any YouTube user who doesn't have millions of devoted fans and followers. And this isn't even the first time it's happened at NASA. In fact, according to NASA, it happens at least once a month, and the video either blocked or slapped with ads on content that you and I already paid for. YouTube does things like this for fear of becoming the target of litigation by content providers. Fair enough, but the system, both the DMCA itself and YouTube's measures to protect itself, is greatly weighted in favor of the content providers. Just an accusation, without any evidence whatsoever, can get a video taken down for 2 weeks, even if there's no justification behind it whatsoever. This is not how things are supposed to work in a just system. And I am going to give YouTube some of the blame here. If they're going to make it this easy for content providers, or even just people looking to cause trouble or scam others out of ad revenues to have videos taken down, they should also have something in place to hold them accountable when they do it falsely. But there just don't seem to be any consequences for doing that, legal or otherwise. This podcast has covered the hideous infringement of freedom of the press committed by several governments with regard to WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Now, Ecuador has granted him asylum, but the UK says it will not allow him to leave the country. So Assange has been staying at Ecuador's London embassy, but the police have now surrounded the embassy and have threatened to arrest Assange and anyone helping him as soon as they step foot outside. Quick recap. Assange runs WikiLeaks, a website devoted to making public documents that are in the public interest. When they published documents allegedly leaked by Bradley Manning detailing war crimes committed by U.S. forces overseas, Assange became their international public enemy number one. And apparently, whatever America wants, other countries are just all too happy to kowtow to make sure they get. But because of pesky little things like freedom of speech and freedom of the press, they weren't actually able to find anything to charge Assange with. So Sweden came to the rescue, dredging up obviously bogus sexual assault charges from years gone back that were long dismissed for lack of evidence. But apparently, that's enough, and they ordered Assange to be extradited from the UK to Sweden. Despite the fact that Sweden claims they just won him for questioning, they've questioned people abroad before. And appallingly, the UK agreed. So for the past 2 months he's been holed up at the embassy, which is legally Ecuadorian soil. British forces have no jurisdiction there. But that hasn't stopped British forces from surrounding the embassy and, according to some reports, threatening to forcibly enter, which, under the Vienna Convention, would be an act of war. The police were quickly met with protesters, and the Twitter feed started lighting up. Ecuador's foreign minister released a statement saying, "This is unbecoming of a democratic, civilized, and law-abiding state. If this conduct persists, Ecuador will take appropriate responses in accordance with international law. If the measures announced in the British official communication materialize, they will be interpreted by Ecuador as a hostile and intolerable act and also as an attack on our sovereignty, which would require us to respond with greater diplomatic force." Ecuador is willing to cooperate with the British police to ensure justice is done, but are concerned that Assange's procedural rights have been violated, and it's clear that they're not going to be intimidated into compliance. Good for them. Ecuador hasn't said what they'd be willing to do in order to cooperate, but one option would be simply to allow Swedish prosecutors to question him at the assembly, since they claim that's all they want to do anyway. And if Sweden refused, it would put lie to the whole sham and confirm Assange's fears that the whole thing is a ruse to get him into the US and into indefinite detention. But it seems indefinite detention is where he is now, because until an agreement can be brokered, Assange is unable to leave the embassy. He can't even go to Ecuador itself. They can't even take him in an embassy car. All this over someone who did nothing more than what the news media are supposed to do to begin with. This isn't really about Assange, it's about our right to know what our own government is up to, how much the news media has failed to do that job, and what government will do to go after people who step in and do the job for them. While Ecuador stands up for free press rights, the rest of Latin America is standing up for something else. While the Obama administration continues its reign of oppression, locking up people who have caused no harm to anyone else, Latin American leaders are coming out against the failed and insane war on drugs. The leaders of several countries, traditional allies with the US in this bogus war on plants, are saying it's time to rethink the whole thing. Like Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, quote, "More than 40 years after the world began this war against drugs, I think we need to analyze whether what we are doing is correct. Even after billions of dollars in aid going to Colombia to fight drugs, it's still the biggest cocaine producer in the world. Now, Colombia has legalized small amounts of cocaine and marijuana." Guatemalan President Otto Perez Molina concurred. Quote, "You would get rid of money laundering, smuggling, arms trafficking, and corruption. In Uruguay, they don't even criminalize drugs for personal use, and now their government has announced a proposal to legalize marijuana. Bolivia walked out of a UN Convention on Narcotics because they use coca leaves as tea or even chew it directly. It probably helps that their president, Evo Morales, is head of the Coca Workers Union. Traditionally, Bolivians have enjoyed the leaf on its own, but still, most of Bolivia's coca is turned into cocaine and exported. The DEA wanted to go in and stop the operation, but Morales kicked them out. Venezuela and Argentina no longer send people to prison for drug possession, and in 2011, the Argentine Supreme Court ruled, quote, "Drug possession for personal consumption in itself does not provide any reason to affirm that the accused have carried out anything more than a private act or that they have offended public morals or the rights of others." Similarly, Mexico has legalized small amounts of drugs for personal possession and has even backed off of street dealers, focusing on large-scale traffickers. Hopefully, this is a good trend that will lead to worldwide legalization efforts. This isn't about the right to do drugs, and it isn't about helping addicts, although they are helped far more with legalization than imprisonment. No, this is about crime and violence. Most of the violent crime in the US is drug-related, and it's a reality other countries are waking up to. When will the US? Well, we certainly won't if we have Obama or Romney as president. One of these days, people are going to start listening to me when I tell them well-meaning legislation has unintended consequences. Case in point, the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, has actually resulted in a greater number of states teaching abstinence-only education. What hasn't been well publicized is a provision of the Affordable Care Act which calls for abstinence-only policies in secondary education. Moreover, the act provides $50 million a year over 5 years for abstinence-only programs. Nancy Pelosi said that we had to pass it to find out what was in it. Well, we're finding out, aren't we? Do you need any more reason to call or write your Congress members and tell them to sponsor the Read the Bills Act? Also, several states, including Texas, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, are passing bills to promote abstinence-only education in their schools. For example, a Tennessee bill says that contraceptives must be presented as an inferior means of preventing pregnancy and disease. It also allows parents to sue teachers and staff for allowing students to hold hands or hug, which it laughably calls gateway sexual behavior. Abstinence has always been a part of sex education in this country, but the abstinence-only programs are distinct and have been proven not to work. Areas with abstinence-only policies have seen increases in teenage pregnancy and STDs. Some of them actually teach that the rhythm method is the most effective method of birth control. Yeah, there's actually a scientific term for people who rely solely on the rhythm method to prevent pregnancy. Parents! So let this be a lesson to you next time you champion some hyped-up government act that nobody has read and denigrate the people who are speaking out against it. With all of the shenanigans that Congress and the President engage in, you never know what you might really be advocating. Another victory repeatedly touted for the Obama administration is its $25 billion bailout of General Motors. We're told by the president and his apologists that this was necessary to keep GM from going bankrupt, which would take down the domestic auto industry and result in the reduction of our global competitiveness, the destruction of millions of jobs, much more polluted air, plagues of locusts, and the earth crashing into the sun. The problem is, now it seems that General Motors is headed for bankruptcy anyway, and the government bailout won't even break even, much less turn a profit as was promised. Although the company has been turning a profit, not that difficult to do when the government gives you billions of dollars, it's been losing market share, both domestically and globally. The feds currently own 500 million shares of GM, about 26% of the company's stock. They'd need to get about $53 a share to break even, but this past Friday, August 17th, it closed at $22.01, which, if the government sold its stock now, would leave them about $15 billion in the hole. On November 17, 2010, the company went public at $33 a share, so its current price represents a 33% nominal loss. If the company had just had the same return as the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it should have increased 20.6%. Not surprisingly, the Obama administration isn't exactly advertising these figures. And even worse, it would be such a political embarrassment to sell the stock at such a loss, meaning that, at a time when it might be wise to get out while you can, the Obama administration has the incentive to ride the stock all the way down, to zero if need be. Of course, no one can tell the future, so we don't know for sure if GM is going to go down into bankruptcy, but it doesn't look good. GM is introducing a redesigned Malibu for 2013, hoping to get some of that market share in the coveted D segment back again. Can they do it? It'll be tough. Ford, Honda, Hyundai, Nissan, Toyota, and Volkswagen are all issuing redesigned D-segment cars for 2013. If GM wants to come out ahead, they'd better step up their game and come up with a redesign that's superior to the competition, something they haven't been able to do for a long time. Unfortunately, when Car and Driver magazine published its comparison of the Malibu to other D-segment cars, it came in dead last. It was even beaten by older models. Not good. GM just isn't the company it was in the 1960s and 70s. It stopped being an innovator and started resting on its laurels. Its impending bankruptcy should have been a wake-up call, and the company's bankruptcy would likely have led to a restructuring, which could very well have made the company better than ever. But why go through all that if the government will just bail you out? This could be trouble for a big feather in Obama's hat. Here he is, somehow managing to get people to forget about the failed and laughable cash for clunkers, and this comes along. Oh, what's an incompetent, ignorant president to do? And now it's time to nullify this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week it goes to prosecuting attorney Michael Valentine for successfully undermining justice by deceiving a jury and getting them to convict a guy who didn't actually commit any crime. Ademo Friedman is a reporter with copblock.org who was reporting on the assault of a 17-year-old high school student by a policeman. To this end, he spoke with several public officials, recording them as is standard practice for news reporting. But Valentine didn't call it reporting, he called it, get this, felony wiretapping. Valentine's opening statements show his skill at deceiving and poisoning the well. Quote, "What you're going to hear over the next couple of days is a story about someone who rejects that premise, rejects that laws have to be followed, and he rejects, in particular, that he has to follow the laws. The defendant speaks about accountability, but he doesn't want to be held accountable. He wants you to excuse his criminal behavior. The defendant wants to distract you. He wants you to think about something other than the law. It's sort of a magic show. It's watch what's going on over here and let him go over here." Even more egregious were Valentine's closing statements, which Ademo didn't get to respond to. He made the ridiculous claim that Ademo, quote, "doesn't want you to have rights," a statement which resulted in an audible gasp from the audience. After all that, the jury only deliberated for 50 minutes before finding Ademo guilty. It didn't help that the wiretapping laws in New Hampshire are extremely confusing. Listen to the relevant statute. Quote, "A person is guilty of a Class B felony if, except as otherwise specifically provided in this chapter, or without the consent of all parties to the communication, the person willfully intercepts, endeavors to intercept, or procures any other person to intercept or endeavor to intercept any telecommunication or oral communication. A person is guilty of a misdemeanor if, except as otherwise specifically provided in this chapter, or without consent of all parties to the communication, the person knowingly intercepts a telecommunication or oral communication when the person is a party to the communication or with the prior consent of one of the parties to the communication, but without the approval required by RSA 570-A2, 2(d). They say ignorance of the law is no excuse. But what about when the laws are worded so ridiculously that no sane person can understand them? Anyway, that really shouldn't matter, because the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of the press trumps any state law. It also didn't help that Ademo defended himself. Valentine knew all the tricks to play to snow the jury. Ademo had neither the education nor experience to defuse them, and through it all, the plight of an innocent high school student seems to have been forgotten. He didn't do too badly. He got the prosecution witness to admit that none of the alleged victims had come forward to complain. But he only got non-committal responses when he asked if public officials on the job have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and he apparently didn't know how to press them for a distinctive answer. He also allowed Valentine to muddy the facts more on redirect. Also, when he tried to ask the alleged victims on the stand if they were harmed by his actions, Valentine objected. Successfully. So maybe Ademo can be blamed a little bit for not getting an experienced defense attorney to help him. But none of that should take any of the scoring away from Valentine. From taking advantage of an inexperienced opponent, to deliberately confusing the jury, to even telling outright lies in closing remarks when he couldn't be rebutted, it's clear that, for doing all of this, not for a dangerous criminal, but for a news reporter trying to gain justice for an innocent child, it's actually being very generous to say that Michael Valentine is merely this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to put on hold and play cheesy music to this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! AlfonZo Rochelle is the host of Zone Nation on PJTV. Don't react, it's not as impressive as it sounds. He makes videos extolling the virtues of nut-wing religious conservatives over liberals, atheists, and those wacky libertarians. The fail has to be heard to be believed.
Most Americans used to call themselves Republican or Democrat, but these days more call themselves independent. But what does that mean exactly?
I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, I'm just independent.
Translation? I'm too lazy to examine what defines both sides, but to make myself sound enlightened and above the fray, I'll claim to be an independent.
Yeah, right. Or maybe they have studied what both sides are in favor of and concluded that they're both so full of bogons it's a wonder they don't explode.
I totally understand. Too many Democrats and Republican representatives suck. People reject them and claim to be independent. But let me be a little more specific as to why they suck. Democrats are typically associated with being liberal, and they suck for being liberals. Republicans are typically associated with being conservative, but they suck because they haven't been being conservative.
Oh, right. Conservatives suck because they're not enough of a backwards bigot who undermines science and uses government to intrude on our personal lives where they have no business being. Gotcha.
Libertarians are just liberals that don't have a love-hate relationship with capitalism.
If by that you mean we think people should be left alone to live their private lives and conduct business as they see fit, as long as they don't interfere with the right of anyone else to do likewise, then yeah. So?
The Constitution does not say that the government can tax the fruits of our labor or impose an income tax.
Yeah, it does. 16th Amendment. This dipstick's not one of those conspiracy nutbars who thinks the 16th Amendment wasn't properly ratified, is he? Of course, the 16th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1913, but before then, you still could have a federal income tax, it just had to be apportioned among the states based on the census count. All the 16th Amendment really did is remove the apportionment restriction. And anyway, libertarians are against the income tax, so I don't even know where he's coming from with this completely wrong claim in the first place.
Pretty much only on the fiscal aspects do libertarians identify themselves with conservatives.
Yeah, and that's a feature, not a bug.
Other than that, they blow their nose with the Constitution. Whether they're blowing snot into it or rolling it up to snort the cocaine they think should be legal. They want drugs legal, prostitution legal.
Oh? And where in the Constitution is government given the power to restrict those things? Maybe this clutch fork shouldn't go taking the constitutional route with people who actually want to follow it while wanting to ignore the enumerated powers to pass the Bogosity he thinks should be passed.
They want defense spending cuts.
Yes, because we could cut it by 90% and still have the biggest military on the planet. Just how many times do we need to be able to invade the entire world anyway? Well, you're getting the idea. Let's skip ahead to the really big fail.
Crime rates have gone down. Sex crime rates have gone down.
Now keep in mind, condom sales have increased and prescriptions for birth control pills have increased. And I don't mean for just controlling acne. The reason why sex crimes are going down is because consensual sex is going up.
Even if that can be shown to be true, isn't that a good thing? The fact that consensual sex means fewer rapes is an argument in favor of it. Or does this Axelrod really think it's better to be raped than have consensual sex?
Much as I respect Reagan, I get tired of hearing the quote that the government is the problem. No, it isn't. The problem has become the people who put these people in power. We get the government we deserve.
Oh, here we go again. More of this blame the victim nonsense in order to let your own pet politicians off the hook. We the people did not put these people in power. We put them in charge of a limited government, and they broke our agreement, the Constitution, and seized more power by force. And this pinion's wonderful conservative politicians had a lot to do with that.
Back to these independent libertarian folks. While America ranks 25th in math, 14th in reading, and 17th in sciences, these people are hung up on kids expressing themselves.
Where you go to a high school now and there are thousands of different possibilities. There are, goth punks who are also Christian and skaters who do this and that and B-girls who are really boys. I mean, it's just exploding all over the place.
And why is this good? A lot of people would say, oh, this is evil.
Yeah, no, I mean, people say that all the time. The reason why it's good is because it allows us as individuals to do things that we want to do.
You go to school to get educated and not indoctrinated, by the way. These kids are fed a poor sense of priority.
You go to school to learn, not for a fashion show.
Now, as a conservative, I encourage expression. You want to wear funky clothes? You want to have a hairstyle that makes you look like a cartoon? More power to you. As long as your report card has straight A's on it first, and you actually understand your lesson and not just memorize notes for a test. If you got that down, then I think you've earned the privilege to express yourself within reason. Piercing your ears and stretching them out wide enough to fit a hamster wheel in it would be an example of not being reasonable. But these cats put precedence on expression. No, these kids need to be taught to handle their business first.
How dishonest can this shift knob get? This was one segment from one episode of Stossel. Stossel has done a lot of railing about our bad educational system. He even has a 1-hour special on it, which he updates every so often, called Stupid in America. Spending a lot more time on that means he is not putting the precedence on expression over education. But then, dishonesty on that level is exactly what we've come to expect from conservatives, isn't it?
What else about this panel got on my nerves? Oh, this mutant analogy.
If you think back to the early 50s or something, there were blacks and whites. Then you have somebody like Tiger Woods, who will put aside the sex addiction for now, but when he rose to prominence, he called himself a Cablinasian, that he was a hybrid of Caucasians, of blacks, of Indians, and of Asians. And that's more what we are. We're mongrelized, we're hybridizing, and we're constantly experimenting and trying out new ways to express ourselves or to show ourselves.
Oh, so because my blood is a mix of Nubian blood and Filipino blood, I'm a mutant? I'm pretty sure I still qualify as a human species. There's no mutation as far as I know.
He didn't say mutant crankshaft, he said hybrid. And I got news for you, Sunshine. You are a mutant. Each and every one of us, including you, has anywhere between 50 and 150 mutations in our genome, base pairs that don't match the genomes of our parents. And yes, you can be a mutant, as we all are, and still be the same species. It's only a new species when a population, not an individual, mutates and evolves to the point where they cannot maintain stable fertility with members of another population. You know, for someone who went on and on about how we need to be educated, you really didn't do a good job educating yourself on this, did you? Just to show you that this staggering amount of fail isn't an isolated instance, let's listen to parts of another of this Bolt Cap's videos.
If you want to see a display of a person whose glowing performances shows the result of hard work, not just as a person of color, but as an American, Obama wouldn't be that example. But gold medal winning gymnast Gabby Douglas, who proclaims her faith in God, would be. And remember, Obama, the head of the Democrat Party, has said, "We are not a Christian nation."
Well, our founding fathers said the exact same thing in the Treaty of Tripoli, just as George Washington turned the presidency over to John Adams. Quote, "As the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries." This was ratified by the Senate and the President as a treaty under the authority of the Constitution, making it the supreme law of the land under Article 6. Not only was it never repealed or overturned, the text of the treaty was published in the newspapers of the time, and there is not the first indication of any public dissent from this clause.
That is a foreshadowing of this country no longer being free to be a Christian nation.
This statement is pure nonsense. It's like talking about a tree being free to be a deciduous forest. Only individuals have rights. What this gudgeon pen is doing is playing the age-old, poor oppressed me card that many Christians like to play when we tell them they're not allowed to use the government to force their ignorant, outdated Bronze Age standards on the rest of us.
I don't dig politics, but I do dig God and his gifts such as liberty.
Liberty is a gift from God? Then explain Romans 13. You know, that bit about how we always have to obey those in power no matter what because God put them there to rule over us? Read that bit? Maybe they don't have that part in that abridged, illustrated children's Bible with the colorful pictures that this cotter pen's apparently reading.
Giving God the glory is the utmost of humility.
Right, because nothing says humble like saying God chose you specifically to win.
You sacrifice making this about yourself and give God the glory. And that's not for God's sake, it's for ours. It keeps us from making it all about us, self-focused and self-righteous, which is a plague to humanity.
Yes, because God has a plan, and that plan apparently involves helping Olympic athletes win gold medals while small children starve to death in Africa. What exactly is wrong with people taking the credit for something people did? Why do accident victims praise and thank God for helping them while saying little, if anything, about the rescue workers, doctors, and nurses who actually did something to actually help them? What's self-focused or self-righteous about that? The self-righteous thing is to claim that God's on your side and wants you to win more than those other competitors. If you could actually prove that God did anything at all to help, the Olympics would ban prayer as a performance enhancer. How is it any kind of plague to recognize the people who help us all the time? All the scientists, inventors, entrepreneurs, workers, teachers, and everyone else who helps us, directly or indirectly, every minute of every day. They don't deserve any of the credit at all? And how do you know it's the Christian God doing all of this? How do you know it's not Allah, or Zeus, or Quetzalcoatl? Isn't it the very epitome of a self-righteous flange nut to insist that it's your God and not anyone else's doing all these favors for people? To ooze smug self-righteousness from every pore while accusing others of the same may get virtual high fives from people who already agree with you, at least the ones whose minds don't work by way of reason and intellectual examination, but you aren't going to convince anyone else. In fact, if anything, you're just going to push people away, which may be the greatest service you've made to humanity. If nothing else, it's enough to get you recognized as this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this religious nut, open and shut, stuck in a rut, extended uncut, roasted chestnut, small grass hut, bad crew cut, knows what's what, and kick in the butt edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums of Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free, but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Benjamin Disraeli. I am a conservative to preserve all that is good in our Constitution, a radical to remove all that is bad. I seek to preserve property and to respect order, and I equally decry the appeal to the passions of the many or the prejudices of the few. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license.